to another edition of the Jace for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jace Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morant's, Joe Johnson's, Ja Raff's, of course. We got Jace. We got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
3 really good Final Four games in a row, and then UConn just kind of had to ruin it, didn't they?
Yeah, and ruined my anticipation for the national championship too. if I'm being completely honest with you, but this is true. 3 out of 4 is pretty good.
Yeah, can't complain overall. You just, you're going for the, I don't even know what you would call it, the quadfecta? The quadruple?
1,000 something.
Yeah. And just didn't happen.
Yeah, on the women's side, you had good games between, it was LSU and Virginia Tech on one side of the bracket, and then South Carolina versus Iowa on the other side. And, I really didn't think that Caitlin Clark was going to be able to do enough by herself to beat South Carolina, but apparently she was. And it's not like she had to be 22 of 31 from the field. She was good as always, but 15 of 31 and 5 of 17 from the 3-point line, and that was still good enough on a poor offensive night for most of South Carolina's team. And then on the men's side, we got Houston just likes buzzer beaters. That's clearly that's clearly the conclusion we have to come to here, because
just an NRG Stadium thing.
We got another buzzer beater inside NRG Stadium between San Diego State and FAU, and then UConn dispatching of Miami, and not for a single second. After about, 3 minutes, did I think Miami was going to win that game? But I'll take 3 out of 4. Anything we need to get to on a kind of 30,000 foot view before we look into these games?
No, let's just hop in.
Let's do it. Starting with the early game, 6 o'clock yesterday evening, San Diego State versus FAU. Two teams that together, Josh, have 67 wins this year. It's a lot of wins. It's a lot of wins. 67-10. These two teams combined now after last night's game, 66-9 before the game started. But San Diego State brings an end to FAU's run as a 9 seed, and there's still not been a 9 seed or worse win their game in a Final Four, 72-71. But it was FAU, Josh, that led for most of this game, and San Diego State was down. I think it was 14 at one point. I think it got up to as many as 14. And they clawed their way back and found a way to win this basketball game.
Yeah, 7-point lead for Florida Atlantic at halftime, and specifically in the first half, this story was what you and I were talking about in our preview. Florida Atlantic, I think it was 6 of their 9 3-pointers came in the first half.
Something like that. I think it was 4 of 9. I think they were 4 of 9 at halftime.
Okay. They were taking them and they were making them. And that allowed them to score. Mm-hmm. And then they were also getting points in the interior, and all of a sudden they had 40 at halftime. Mm-hmm. And you go, well, if this continues, San Diego State's not winning this game. Now, San Diego State then proceeded to hold them to 31 points in the second half. And also, to San Diego State's credit, the entire game was making threes and finished 9 of 18. So they were good offensively, too. It was one of those games where they were going to get into the high 60s, low 70s. The question was, could they do enough defensively, especially after how poor the first half went? And then, they started crashing the glass in the second half. They kept missing free throws, but found a way to make that okay, and got it back to where, in the final minutes, it was just going back and forth because these two teams are very evenly matched, and it came down to 2 possessions, and San Diego State won them both, got the stop, and then as you somehow, I guess maybe not predicted, but envisioned, Lamont Butler became a household name.
Lamont Butler did become a household name with maybe one of the most buttery jump shots of all time. I didn't think they had a timeout, and I was surprised that they didn't call it, to be honest with you. But and it looked like, I mean, it kind of just looked like Lamont Butler didn't realize how much time he had left, because he was kind of like in no man's land, kind of in the short corner, and then just took a hard step to the left and pull up jumper and got for a possession that looked like they were going to have to throw up a really bad shot, until he just got half a step. It wasn't even a step. It was just half a, he just got a little bit of separation and was able to get a really clean, mid-range jump shot that didn't touch the rim. And when it left his hand, it looked really, really, really good. But I was a little surprised that they didn't, because between Matt Bradley, who had a really, really good game and scored 11 of his 21 points in the first 4 minutes of this game, he got off to a really, really fast start. It wasn't him who ended up with the ball. It wasn't Darian Trammell that ended up with the ball. It was kind of Lamont Butler, and I would still argue that that's not exactly what they were hoping they were going to get, was a Lamont Butler contested jumper, but that's what they got, and he made it happen.
Yeah, it was just kind of strange, because it looked like, this is just going down a very bad path. And then it almost kind of looked like he started going too fast, and I thought, is he just going to shoot this? And then all of a sudden, by the time he actually got the shot off, it was perfectly timed. You were going to win or lose on that shot, because the ball was in the air when the buzzer went off, which made it that much cooler.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, eventually it worked out to the point where you feel pretty good about that shot. It just didn't necessarily always look like it was going to get there, because he was trying to get to the basket, and credit to Nick Boyd for stopping him. So then you got to go to plan B, and took some steps to kind of figure out exactly how to make that happen. But he did, and that was smooth. Incredibly smooth. Onion.
He said after the game that the plan was just to get downhill. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if it was just whoever got the ball was going to go downhill. He didn't, unless I missed it, he didn't clarify whether the play from Brian Dutcher was, okay, let's get Lamont downhill, or if it's just whoever ends up with the basketball, we try to get downhill, we try to get to the rim, and then kind of, if we don't get all the way there, hopefully there's been some movement on the defense that allows us to get a good shot. And I mean, on a final possession, that's about as good of a shot as you can hope for. I just didn't think until about half a second before he took it that he was aware of how little time he had left, and that it was kind of have to be a, you don't get to take any move into the jumper. It's just kind of get the jumper off kind of thing. But that is not how it ended up.
Yeah. Yeah. I now that you're saying that, I also remember having that thought of, does he know this thing is winding down?
Right.
Was just, the lead up to it was kind of strange, but he made the shot. That's all that matters. And like you said, Matt Bradley was massive, finished with 21 points, and kind of kept them alive during some points where their offense struggled, specifically early. Right. Mm-hmm. He came out of the gates flying, and then went real quiet for a while. And then as they were making their run in the second half, was kind of back at the forefront of that. So he timed his points very well and kept them afloat as they were trying to navigate things in the first half. And, you put the magic number at 10 made threes for Florida Atlantic, right?
Mm-hmm. I think I said 10 of 25 was kind of the type of night that they were going to need to have.
And they ended with 9. And you could very well argue, now they shot the ball well, 41%, 9-22. Yeah. But you could argue that was the difference and especially as the game went on, San Diego State's defense really started to pick up and look like itself. And so that's how you go from scoring 40 in the first half to 31 in the second. And even on a day where you were bad defensively for a while, giving up 71 isn't the end of the world, like we talked about. These are games San Diego State can win. If they would have gotten to 75, they would have won. That's really the benchmark. If San Diego State keeps teams under 75, they've got a really good chance to win, because on the right night, you can get a couple plays, Matt Bradley goes off, and you end up with 72, and the other team has 71.
Yeah, I mean, and when you compare the 3-point shooting, just like you can't not come out with an advantage on the 3-point line against San Diego State, especially when you're Florida Atlantic. You can't make the same number of threes on more attempts than San Diego State. It's just not going to happen. Like, and I was in like late in this game. I mean, and you know, we can get to kind of the Florida Atlantic side of this specifically, but you know, there was one spectacular offensive night, and there was a couple, you know, there was one other solid offensive night from Florida Atlantic players individually. But I was like, if you told me that Florida Atlantic didn't end up with any advantage on the 3-point line, I would not have bet that this game was in jeopardy in the last 2 minutes.
Right.
I wouldn't have bet that they were able to, like, they got to the free throw line 21 times. They, you know, so I guess they were what is that? 14 of 30 from inside the arc, which is just short of 50%. They were able to get to the front of the rim and able to make things happen inside the 3-point line to an extent that I was not expecting. So that's credit to them. But if you're not, especially when you're a Florida Atlantic team that has shot the ball really well and at a high volume all year, you've got to win the 3-point line, and they didn't.
Yeah, and also the other thing, if you're looking at, because these box scores are very similar, it indicates a game decided by one possession, which is obviously what we got.
Right.
The other thing that kind of stood out to me from a box score standpoint is that John L. Davis was 2-9 and finished with 8 points.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, Elijah Martin had 26. You got plenty of contributions. All 9 guys who played scored. You know, a couple guys with 8, a couple guys with 5. You got 1, 2, 3. Well, only Martin and Boyd made 7 of the 9 3-pointers. But you did get contributions kind of across the board. What you didn't get was that second guy in the 15 to 18 point range. And arguably your best player just had a rough night, which is going to happen against San Diego State. But when you're looking at things that make the difference and kind of how did Florida Atlantic not win this game? Because I'm with you that if you lay this out, I'm taking Florida Atlantic. You're looking for a reason why it was just a little bit, they came up a little bit short in the end. The fact that you didn't have that second guy getting 14 plus and John L. Davis really struggled is the main thing I'm looking at.
Not to mention that the guy that you had dubbed the most important player for Florida Atlantic's Final Four chances was in foul trouble and ended up with 5 points and 4 rebounds. And it's not like they're asking Vlad Golden to do a ton of scoring, but he had 14 and 13 against Kansas State in the Elite Eight.
Yeah.
And that just makes life so much easier when he's able, 6 of 11 from the field. And if nothing else, he played 29 minutes in that game and played 27 against Tennessee. And he was only able to be on the floor for half of this game. And that's a guy who is as important as he is. And he was almost like if there was a prop bet was for would Vlad Golden be in foul trouble, I might have taken that bet just because of how much he's asked to do on the interior. But with that being said, when I picked John L. Davis and you picked Vlad Golden, and neither of those guys had great games.
Yeah.
And they still almost won.
Mm-hmm. Which, again, is a testament to how deep and how flexible they are. That they just put themselves in positions no matter how things are going.
Mm-hmm. Elijah Martin, 26 and 7 on 7 of 13 shooting, 3 of 7 from the 3-point line, 9 of 10 from the free throw line. He had like 19 of his 26 in the second half. He was like everything else aside, he was the reason that despite only scoring 31, like they scored 31 and one guy had 19 of them in the second half. Like that is credit to him for, like, he's the reason that they were winning with 1 second left in this game. And it just barely wasn't enough. But that's that performance against that defense, especially when the rest of his team couldn't really get anything going in the second half, was a really, really impressive thing that one that is on the maybe not the shortest of lists, but that's pretty high on some of the most impressive things I've seen from an individual player in the Final Four.
Sure. Do you have anything else on this game in particular?
Not especially, no.
You really don't think they can go do no. Not this, as in get back to the Final Four. You really don't think they can replicate this next season, though?
I mean, if this team comes back, yeah, sure. I just don't think this team is going to come back.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they are a top 20 team preseason. Most, if not all of these guys are back, and they're going to be excellent again next season.
I like the argument is never they're not going to be good next season. The argument is that if you play this exact tournament 10 times, they don't get past the first round, 7 of them. They should have lost the Memphis game.
Sure.
That's my point. And they didn't. It's not like they were they had a couple really impressive performances, but they played a depleted Tennessee team in the Sweet 16 and the 16 seed in the round of 32. Mm-hmm. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, sure. They got absolutely. They got a fortunate path. I'm to the point, and maybe this is just me getting caught up in it. I'm completely sold. To me, that's 100% valid. And again, that's not saying they're going back to the Final Four next year, but I'm not convinced it would have mattered all that much. And maybe I'm wrong. To me, this is the final point.
You know what you're doing right now, right? You're using an NCAA tournament run to justify what's going to happen next year.
That's where I was going to go with this.
Yeah, you should stop this.
Okay. Here's the difference, though. This is not taking an NCAA tournament run to rewrite a narrative. This is using an NCAA tournament run to reinforce a narrative that was produced over the entire season when they won 31 games or whatever it was heading in. Yeah, 31 because they have 35 wins, 4 in the tournament. That's the difference. It's not, they really were better than we thought. It's no, they got an opportunity to back up what they did in the regular season and in the conference tournament, and they did it. That's the difference.
I'm not sure I agree with that because if they lose in the round of 32, you're not talking about how good they're going to be next year. So by definition, you're adjusting the ceiling of a team based on what they did in the NCAA tournament.
And that is where it gets tricky, admittedly, because you could also spin that and say, okay, they went toe to toe with what's theoretically going to be the best team in the AAC next season, right?
Who?
Memphis.
Okay, sure.
In which case, as they move to the AAC, they're in position to be potentially the best team in the conference, even if they lose that game.
Sure.
So, would the conversation be different had they lost that game? Of course. Nobody's going to be excited about Florida Atlantic heading into next season except for college basketball people, because nobody would have cared if Florida Atlantic lost in the first round. Well, I get that part of it. There's certainly some of the magic of this run. You can also look at that, though, and go, look, they won 31 games. That's a difficult Memphis team. They almost beat them. They're moving to a better conference. Theoretically, all these guys are coming back. I'm sold on this. To me, this is not a one-off. This is the beginning of Florida Atlantic becoming.
The other thing you need to recognize is that if they have another good year next year, Dusty May's time at Florida Atlantic is limited. Let's not be naive.
Probably.
And whoever takes over for him, they'll be a fine AAC team. That's just the reality of the situation when you're Florida Atlantic. And it's borderline a miracle that he's turned the program into what it is, because Florida Atlantic doesn't give a damn about their basketball program. There were stories, when this run happened, there were stories about Dusty May, stories resurfacing about, Dusty May crying.
Right. He didn't want to, he regretted taking the job. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so somebody's going to come calling that wants him to do that at a program that can pay him 4 times what he's making at Florida Atlantic right now. So like it's, and also like being the best team in an AAC that doesn't have Houston means nothing to me. 0 to me. That's a top 25 team, maybe.
Sure. Depending on how the season goes. And
because Memphis could have been like if Houston wasn't there, Memphis would have been the best team, and they were not a top 25 team basically all year.
Yeah, and the final thing I'll say is this is going to start from a very different point next season, right? Whether it should or not, it's going to. You don't have to prove.
Also true.
You don't have to prove anything. We talk about proceedings instant, right? They're going to be unless they lose everybody, they're going to be a top 25 team preseason. They might be top 15 depending on how things go.
Mm-hmm.
That's helpful. Yeah, you're 100% right about the program building, about the history of FAU basketball. To me, this is just one of those situations where this has been so beneficial and so exciting and so unexpected that they're going to put the money in. Right? This is a school that's hired Lane Kiffin and Tom Herman as its football coach. There's some money there if they want to use it. That they're going to basically, Dusty May is going to force them to put the money in. And you're already seeing it. I think they're investing $10 million in a practice facility. He just got a new contract.
Mm.
He's basically forcing them to put the money in to give him what he needs, because he's proven this is what he can do if things fall right, and if even without kind of the resources to try and take it to a little bit of a next level. And you can't just sort of turn that down. So we'll see what happens. To me, this is the start of a transformation in what we think of as Florida Atlantic basketball. And yes, I'm not usually the person to jump into that after an NCAA tournament, which is how strongly I believe in this, that I'm willing to go that far.
I will predict right now that either FAU is aggressively average next year or Dusty May's last season at FAU is next year.
Okay.
I will predict that right now.
We'll have to revisit this.
Because if he wins 70 games in 2 years, he won't be FAU's coach 2 years from now. He just won't. He won't. Like, that's not how this works. In the same way that, like, all of those guys, if Duke came calling for those guys, they're probably going to go to Duke. Like, probably. That's just how it works. And I haven't looked, but I'd be curious to see and it's a little different at this point because I'm sure the eligibility left for the Florida Atlantic guys doesn't rival any of like the George Masons of the world, because typically those teams like are so old and so seasoned that a lot of you don't get a ton of guys coming back.
I believe it's 8 of the 9 in the rotation.
Right. Right. That's what I'm saying. So I'm not sure it would be fair to like go and see what George Mason did the year after they made the Final Four.
Yes. Right. That's part of this too. Yeah. They can actually bring their entire team back with the exception of Michael Forrest. Yeah. It's not just that, all of a sudden Florida Atlantic's going to be able to recreate this. Mm-hmm. No, it's that these guys can continue it. And then if they have more success, then you're elevating, for the next level of recruits, and that there is a much larger impact and a much more long-lasting impact from this group than previous Final Four runs. Yes, good point.
San Diego State will play in the Final Four. The national championship game on Monday evening.
30 years after that Fab Five game.
How about that?
Brian Dutcher's back. How
about that? UConn 72, Miami 59. This game was probably not that close. Adama Sanogo got off to a hot start. I said 28-12 is what I was feeling for Adama Sanogo. It was 21-10.
Slacker.
Honestly, I'll take that. And to be honest, on a night where, Jordan Hawkins had 13 on 3 of 8, Tristan Newton on 7 on 2 of 8, Andre Jackson in a little bit of foul trouble early in this game. So it was He only played 22 minutes, 6 points, 4 assists, 2 rebounds. Doesn't sound super impressive so far, but you got a little bit of contribution. Naheem Aline off the bench, 8 points. He's just the type of guy. I'll take 11 shots off the bench. Fine, whatever you need me to do. He hasn't seen a shot he doesn't like. Joey Calcaterra, 5 points as well. Donovan Clingan got a couple buckets, but wasn't a super impressive night from UConn. But on the other side of things, when those 3 guards go 11 of 30 from the field, it's probably not going to be the best of offensive nights for the Hurricane. And that was what we saw last night in the late game in Houston.
Yeah. And it was from the very beginning when they dug themselves the hole and weren't making shots.
Yep.
You just went, oh, yeah, they don't have it. They're not right. They are not making shots the way that they normally do. They missed a bunch of layups and shots at the rim. Mm-hmm. Not to say that all of those were just completely uncontested, 2-footers. But those are the kind of plays that they have been making and you need to make if you're going to hang with UConn. And, yeah, I mean, your starters were 3 of 8, 0 of 7, 3 of 10, 4 of 10, and 4 of 10. Mm-hmm. And Norchad Amir was the one who was 3 of 8. Wooga Poplar was 0 of 7, and then, like you said, the guards, 30 shots between them, only hit 11. The size really seemed to bother them, which is expected because there just aren't many teams that can physically give you what UConn gives you. Mm. And maybe this is a little bit different story. If one of those guys is playing well, at least they can hang around because they did. I think they cut it to 8 at one point in the second half, and you thought
it was like 53-45 at one point. I think.
Yeah, you thought, well, maybe. Mm-hmm. But then the problem is you got to make the run after the run because they needed the run to cut it to 8. Right. And then, it was Jordan. I think at that point, that one might have been when Jordan Hawkins just nailed a 3. And it's back to 11. And you just go, oh, well, UConn never let it get to the point where it was really in danger. Mm-hmm. They always had an answer when they needed it. And, Miami's going to make plays because they're a great offensive team. And the other thing, too, is they did a good job on the offensive glass. I mean, they had more offensive rebounds than UConn did. And UConn started to kind of wear them down as the game went on, but especially early. They were getting offensive rebounds and UConn wasn't. And it still just didn't matter because they weren't making shots. And UConn, hits 35% of their threes, which is fine, enough for that to be a factor. And yeah, Sanogo was just better than everybody else. And when you're Miami trying to pull off an upset against a team that's much better defensively than you, that's a problem.
Yeah, it's a combination of, Sanogo gives you such a high floor because it's just, and especially against this Miami team that just had nothing to stop him, just nothing.
And you go into games concerned about Amir getting into foul trouble, and B, when Amir goes to the bench, there is no backup big.
Right.
Right. They just don't have. They just don't have somebody.
Right. Right. And your primary option against a Adama Sanogo guy who is 6'10", 250 is a guy who's only 6'7", like 6'7", 240. So like has the mass, the girth to really bother him, but it's also like he is so physical and so powerful inside that any type of physical attributes that you give up to him is just amplified as a result. Because bigger guys than Sanogo, there aren't very many of them, but like it's not like bigger guys than Sanogo have an easy time stopping him because he's just so physical. And it was pretty clear pretty quickly that there was nobody on that Miami team last night that really could stop him.
Yeah. And they did enough defensively. I mean, if you ask Jim Larrañaga, he probably lives with 72.
Probably.
That's the way you have to win, right? They weren't holding UConn to 66 unless everything went perfectly for them. Mm-hmm. They're designed to go win this game 78-72, and they got 59 points instead. because, and they sort of going into the national title matchup, the defense finally won out. Right? The two teams that are the best two defensive teams left in this tournament are heading into the Final Four were the two that survived. Now, San Diego State wasn't great defensively. We talked about that. UConn was really good defensively, but we know what San Diego State is. And sometimes, right, it's what we've been talking about. You got to find a way to win a game in the 70s sometimes. And they made the plays. They hit the threes needed to do that. And so now the formula, the theory is going to hold up for another season, that you have to be a really good defensive team to survive this tournament, that you just aren't going to get 6 electric offensive performances, which is what Miami was going to need to win a national title. They got 3 and survived a game where they weren't great offensively, and then had another rough go of it in the Final Four and are going home as a result.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they got fortunate that they got their stinker offensive game against Drake and not against literally anybody else that they played.
Yep.
And the thing you got against Drake that you didn't get in this game was a really nice individual performance. Because Nigel Pack was really good against Drake. And he was the only guy who was really good against Drake. But he was really good against Drake. And on this particular night, it's not like you said, it's not like you got one of them kind of going, right? And, they only scored 63 in that Drake game. But if they finish with 63 in this game, that means they're probably within 10 points for most of the second half, if somebody kind of has it going. But that wasn't really the case. And I kept, what happened, I thought, was what I was expecting to happen at some point far before this, which is just the length and the athleticism and the size of UConn's perimeter defenders was an issue.
Yep.
And I mean, not necessarily against Indiana, right? I mean, Jalen Hood-Schifino is kind of the main perimeter guy, but we're also talking about guys like Trey Galloway and Tamar Bates. Like, that doesn't exactly incite fear into you defensively, but we're talking about
Houston and Texas.
Houston's backcourt and Texas's backcourt. Like, that is on the list of things that, like, to put up over like almost 190 points in 2 games. Sorry, 170 points across 2 games against those 2 defenses is super impressive. And at some point, I thought it was going to be earlier than this, but on this particular night, it looked like they were they were bothered by the length and athleticism of UConn's perimeter defense. And it was going to happen at some point, and this was the last best chance, so to speak, for it to happen.
I had the exact same thought, and then went to that next part of it, which is, because I was going, this is just a bad matchup for them. But then the same logic applies to the last 2 rounds, and it didn't matter. So it's kind of this point where they've earned the benefit of the doubt that they can just score 80 on anybody. Now, can they do it 3 times in a row against 3 of the longer, most athletic, best defenses in the country? They got past 2, couldn't get past the 3rd one. And because I look at that, I mean, and that's the beauty of this UConn team, is they can kind of blend into whatever they need to be. Right? If they have you got to have 2 bigs that can defend, because they're going to have one on the floor at all times. They've got, just kind of different players they can throw at you off the bench. It's primarily Klingon and guards, but they can play smaller, right? They can play 4 out and kind of do so anyway, because Caravan can obviously shoot the ball. But they can go smaller if they need to and put, Andre Jackson as the 4. They can put Caravan and Jackson out there and Hawkins. And now all of a sudden, right, their starting lineup is just ginormous. But they're all guys who are comfortable on the perimeter. They can all shoot the ball. They are just, this is the kind of team I would want to build, which I think is the best compliment I can give Dan Hurley is, I want these dudes, because I don't know how to stop these dudes.
Right. Well, the answer to stopping these dudes is Adam Sanogo only getting 6 shots a game. That's the way to stop him.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll look back on, jumping the gun a little bit here, but do you think we'll look back on this season as UConn being the best team? Will it be one of those hindsight, yeah, UConn was probably the best team all year?
It's such a difficult question.
Let me ask you this question. If they lose just like 2 of 3, or 3 of 4 even?
Oh, yeah. Without question.
Because what's interesting about UConn is that they dropped off the face of that conversation and never came back.
Right.
And which is interesting because they've lost 8 games this year. One of them was in the Big East tournament, and then the other 6 of the other 7 were between December 31st and January 25th.
Yep.
They've lost twice since January 31st, and they didn't lose before December 31st.
And haven't lost to a team outside the Big East.
Also true. It's such an interesting study, like case study of how people react to a team's season.
Yeah, I would say no. There's absolutely an argument that can be made. What I would say is that it was very clear their ceiling was as high as any teams in the country, and that never changed. The question was, how close were they going to get to reaching it? Because you saw it during non-con, and then it didn't happen during a Big East play, and as soon as they started picking it up at the end, especially once that schedule got a little bit easier. They kind of got some confidence, started picking up some wins. You lose to Marquette in a coin flip game in the Big East tournament, or else they might have won that too.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was never, because this was always possible. To me, that's what this team's legacy is kind of going to be, and particularly assuming they actually win this game against San Diego State. But you saw just how good they could be. They weren't able to sustain it all season, but they figured it out again at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no question that they were as dangerous in this tournament as any team. Maybe it took, 2 rounds to realize that. But that's the legacy, is that they lived up to their potential, and we saw what their potential was, which is what you're supposed to do in this sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody cares that they didn't win anything in the regular season in terms of Big East accolades, and nobody's going to remember that they were just bad for a month there, because they showed you what they could do. They figured it out again. They figured out how to, in credit to that coaching staff, how to realize this team's potential. And you went, oh, yeah, well, they got themselves playing their best basketball when it mattered. And so everybody knew this was possible. It was just a question of, was it going to get there? Because everybody kind of decided the answer was no once they started losing those games.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it'll also kind of be, they were on that list of teams that didn't have, like in a year where the mantra was kind of everybody sucks, they were one of those teams that didn't have the obvious, like, this is why this team is going to lose a game in the tournament, right?
Yes.
In the way that, Houston seems to get to a point where they hit a ceiling in the tournament, and this year it was a little different, right? I mean, they just ran into a Miami team that couldn't miss on that particular night. You can go to Alabama, you could go to Purdue. We talked about it as it looked like Texas and UConn were going to go to the Final Four, right? That was kind of how people were leaning. And this idea of, like, those are probably the teams at the very top of the list of those teams are about as well-rounded as we got this year. And that, that still remains true for Texas, but it remains true for UConn, and it's gotten them this far because they just don't have, they've kind of run through they've run through this tournament at this point. They still haven't lost a game they still haven't won a game by single digits in this tournament. But they don't have very many things that you're really, really worried about rearing their ugly head before the game starts, because none of them are. There just aren't any that are that big when it comes to UConn.
Yeah, and I mean, I would argue near the top of that list is Andre Jackson and foul trouble. That didn't matter.
Yeah.
I thought, well, if Miami's going to get back in this game, that's the first step. Because he had two within four. I mean, he had two at the under 16 timeout.
Yeah, it was fast.
Didn't matter whatsoever.
Yeah.
Looking at this from a San Diego State perspective, that's one thing I'm really trying to do, is I'm trying to get Andre Jackson in foul trouble. And then the other thing is you kind of just got to hope they miss their threes. You can't overcompensate and try and take away the three-point line, because then Sanogo and Klingon are going to have a field day.
Mm-hmm.
But you're better positioned to actually guard them one-on-one and make their lives difficult, make them earn their points, and keep them off the glass. And then you gotta hope they have a bad shooting night, because you can't take away both. If I'm looking,
I'd rather have Jordan Hawkins taking threes than being downhill all day.
Right. Yeah. To me, you got to build this kind of inside out, and just hope that because sometimes you just don't make your shots from the perimeter, and if you tempt them into enough of them and they're not going in, it allows you to kind of dictate the terms of the game a little bit, because you got to keep this slow too. Don't let them get out in transition. Don't let them kind of pick up the pace. If you can control the game, and if they shoot the ball even worse than the 9 of 26 they had in this one, to me, that's the formula for San Diego State. And then you
Seems
hope that.
Tough.
What did you say?
So that seems tough.
Yeah, right. And there is a whole, and we've been talking about this all season. There's just this long checklist of things that have to go right, I feel like, to beat this team, because one of them can, and it still doesn't make that much of an impact if they're playing up to their potential. And I certainly don't feel like we're going to come into this game and just get a stinker of a performance from UConn. And, they're way too confident right now, for good reason. They're playing incredibly well. They figured it out. That's not going to go away in 48 hours.
Very, very true. Very true. UConn, San Diego State, the season finale of the 2022-23 college basketball season, and just an unacceptable 9:20 Eastern tip. Just an unacceptable 9:20 Eastern tip. It is what it is, though. And we'll be back on Tuesday to chat about it. You got anything else?
Let's make our predictions.
Oh, yeah.
Then I have one more thing.
Okay. Well, I'm going to pick UConn.
As am I. They haven't. Oh, what was I don't know what the stat was, but I think they're something like tied for the longest winning streak in Sweet 16 onward in tournament history or something.
So the last two times they made it to the Sweet 16, they won the title.
I believe so, because they've won the national championship every time they've played in it. When they go deep, they win the whole thing. Right? There's not a bunch of these Elite Eight and Final Fours where they don't actually win.
I think coming into this year, it was 6 Final Four appearances and 4 titles for UConn in their history. So, I mean, batting 666 ain't bad.
No. And they're undefeated title. Yeah, Of course, this will then. I mean, I guess the other thing you're hoping if you're San Diego State is, well, they got to lose a title game sometime. Maybe we're the team, which would be fitting for this season. But I'm picking the Huskies.
So let's see. They haven't lost a game before they haven't lost a game after the Sweet 16. Also, that's a little awkward. In the 20, you know how on Basketball Reference it tells you where they got to in the tournament, right? Like their history page. Well, their history page for 2022-23 already says 1 NCAA tournament national final.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. you know how it bolds when you win a title?
Yeah.
It's already bolded and says that they won NCAA tournament national final.
That is wild. What is going on at Basketball Reference?
I don't know. Basketball Reference is an absolutely horrible page at this point. Did you know that they're trying to sell you a home every time that you click to a different page.
Oh yeah, they're always selling something.
It's
I'm going to see if
San Diego. I'm
going to see if San Diego State has also been crowned national champions. Indeed, they have.
Interesting. Clearly, just something. Somebody typed it in wrong. Someone needed to say NCAA tournament national semifinal,
or unbold it and something. Yeah.
Anywho, they haven't lost a game past the Sweet 16 since they lost in the national semifinal in 2009 to who they play.
Michigan
Did
State.
they play Michigan State? Okay. I couldn't remember if it was Michigan State or UNC that they played.
I believe it was Michigan State. Yeah. So that's what it is, right? When they get this far, they get the job done.
Yeah. Pretty spot on. All right, what's your last thing? Or was that your last thing?
No, I just want to give a shout out to Aaliyah Boston. That team had to deal with a lot of crap. Unnecessary crap. And she's obviously now declared for the WNBA. She's going to be the #1 overall pick. But just the way she handled
Welcome to Indiana.
The way that she handled the end of her career, the way she handled questions after that game, I was just really impressed at her maturity and her grace. So I wanted to give her a shout out because people her age shouldn't have to deal with some of the things she's had to deal with.
Shouts to Leah Boston. I'm here for that.
And now we get to see if Caitlin Clark is going to do it.
And literally win a national title by herself. Literally. Like, with all due respect to the rest of her teammates. Like truly all due respect.
I did, maybe I'll go still do this. I wanted to do a comparison of points generated between her and Steph and Marquise Noel in terms of percentage of, field goals assisted or scored as a percentage of their team to see how they compare. Maybe I'll do it if I get inspired today. We'll see.
That's crazy. 41, 41, 31, 22, 26. Those are her points in the NCAA tournament. It's not bad. It's pretty good.
No. That is not bad. That is factually accurate.
That's pretty good. It's pretty good. 41, 6 and 8, 41, 10 and 12, 31, 3 and 8, 22, 3 and 12, 26, 7 and 12. It's pretty good. All right, I'm out of things. You got anything else? We'll be back on Tuesday to talk national championship. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod. Check out the YouTube, all of those fun things. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. Like I said, we will be back on Tuesday to talk national championships, and we will see you then. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Josh. He's Josh. And we will see you later.